I never told my daughter what I was worth. Her husband looked at my grocery store sneakers and told her I was a liability. She agreed, in writing, in a text message I was never supposed to see. 3 months later, I bought the building where he worked. Good evening, dear listeners. I'm Nora, and I'm glad you found your way here. Please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me what city you're joining from. It means more than you know. My name is Carol Ann Whitfield. I was 54 years old when my son-in-law, Marcus Reed, called me a drain on their future. In the same week, he asked me to co-sign a loan I knew nothing about. And the thing that still strikes me, even now, is how long I let the version of me they had invented go unchallenged. Not out of weakness. Out of patience. I have always believed that the most precise response is rarely the fastest one. Let me take you back. I had spent 22 years working as a commercial real estate acquisitions manager for a private equity firm based in Charlotte, North Carolina. The work was not glamorous. It involved spreadsheets, zoning maps, county assessor databases, and a great deal of time on the phone with people who assumed that because I was a woman who did not raise her voice, I could be managed. They learned otherwise, eventually. My compensation reflected the kind of leverage I had built quietly over 2 decades. A base salary, a performance bonus structure, and equity stakes in several acquisitions that had, over the years, compounded into something I had never once described aloud at a dinner table. My mother raised me in rural Virginia outside of Roanoke, in a house where money was discussed only when it was absent. When it was present, you said nothing, because the people who talk about what they have are the first ones to lose it to someone who was listening. I carried that lesson forward without examining it too closely. It became simply the way I was, careful, private, and unwilling to let my finances become someone else's arithmetic. My husband Robert passed 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. It was the kind of loss that strips everything unnecessary from your life and leaves only what is actually true. What was true was that I had a career I was good at, a house in the Myers Park neighborhood of Charlotte that I had paid off, and a daughter named Lydia who had her father's laugh and, I had believed, his instinct for people. Lydia married Marcus Reed on a Saturday in October 4 years ago. He was 36, worked in commercial lending at a regional bank, and had the particular confidence of a man who has never been seriously wrong about anything because he has never seriously been tested. I noticed this at their first meeting. I chose not to name it, the way you choose not to mention a small crack in a ceiling when you're not yet sure whether it's settling or something worse. For 3 years, I was a present and unremarkable mother-in-law. I came for holidays. I brought food. I helped Lydia repaint the spare bedroom when they moved into their house in Ballantyne. I sent birthday cards on time and didn't stay past Sunday evening when I visited. I thought we had an unspoken arrangement of mutual goodwill. I have since revised that assessment. The first thing I noticed was the way Marcus spoke about money around me. Not to me, around me. He would mention their mortgage at the dinner table in a way that wasn't quite a complaint, but wasn't quite not one either. He talked about Lydia's student loans with a particular weariness that I understood was partly addressed to me. Once, while I was helping clear dishes after Thanksgiving, he said to Lydia, loudly enough that I was certain he intended me to hear, that it would just be nice to know where things stood, with everyone. Going forward, I set the casserole dish in the sink and turned on the tap and did not say anything. The second thing I noticed was that Lydia began asking questions that were not quite hers. How was my retirement planning going? Did I have a financial advisor? Had I thought about what I wanted to do with the Charlotte house eventually? They were reasonable questions asked in an unreasonable register. The register of someone who has been asked to ask them and is slightly uncomfortable doing so. I told her my finances were in good order. She nodded in the way that people nod when they are reporting back to someone else. The third thing was the text message. I was at Lydia's house in March of last year. I had come down for the weekend because she had mentioned, casually, in a phone call, that she had been feeling low and could use the company. I brought soup ingredients and stayed Friday to Sunday. On Saturday morning, while Lydia was in the shower and Marcus was allegedly at the gym, I picked up my phone from the kitchen counter and discovered I had picked up Lydia's by mistake. The case was the same. I had bought them for us both the previous Christmas, one of those small gestures of mother-daughter continuity that I now see differently. The screen had not locked yet. A text conversation was open. Marcus's name was at the top. I am not someone who reads other people's messages. I want to say that clearly, but the first line was already visible before I understood what I was looking at, and the first line said, "She doesn't have anything, Lydia. I've looked. The house has equity, but that's about it. We can't keep treating her like she's going to solve anything for us." I set the phone down on the counter face down. I stood at the kitchen window for a moment and looked at the backyard where their dog was turning slow circles, in the grass. I heard the shower turn off upstairs. I put the soup on the stove and began cutting carrots, and I thought, with the precise lateral thinking that 22 years of acquisitions work had built in me. They have built a model. The model is wrong, and they are making decisions based on the wrong model. I did not say anything that weekend. I drove home Sunday evening with the windows down and the radio off, and I thought the whole 3 hours. Here is what I knew. Marcus had assessed me and concluded I was house rich and cash limited, a retired woman sitting on a paid-off property and not much else. This was an understandable conclusion if you had never looked past the surface of me. I drove a 7-year-old Subaru. I bought my clothes at department store sales and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. I had never mentioned, not once in 4 years of Sunday dinners and holiday visits, that the equity stakes I held in 3 commercial properties in the Charlotte metro area had, as of the previous fiscal year, a combined value north of $4 million. Or that the performance bonuses I had reinvested since Robert died had grown in ways that my accountant, Franklin Ossie, described with a satisfaction I found both professional and slightly touching. I hadn't mentioned it because it hadn't come up, because I was my mother's daughter. Because money talked about carelessly is money that starts working for someone else. Now it had come up, sideways, and in a text message on a Saturday morning, but it had come up. I called Franklin on Monday. He was 61, had managed my financial affairs for 9 years, and had the quality I most valued in a professional. He asked one question at a time and waited for the full answer before asking the next one. I told him I wanted a complete picture of my current position, assets, liquidity, the equity structures on all 3 properties, the retirement accounts, everything. I also told him I wanted it in a document I could hold in my hand. He had it ready by Wednesday. I sat at my dining room table and read it the way I read acquisition reports, without skipping to the summary, without looking for the conclusion first, from the first line to the last. When I finished, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and sat for a while with the document on the table in front of me. Then I opened my laptop and began looking at commercial real estate listings. I was not yet certain what I was looking for. I was in the early stage of what I had always called the listening phase, The period before a deal takes shape, when you simply absorb the landscape and let the patterns find you. What I knew was this: I was not going to call Lydia and deliver a financial disclosure to prove a point. That was not precision. That was just noise. What I wanted was something quieter and more durable, something that would rewrite the story, without me having to explain that the story was wrong. It was the following Tuesday that Marcus called me. I was in a meeting at the time, which he did not know because he did not know I was still working. He left a voicemail. His voice was pleasant and rehearsed in the way of a man who had thought about the call before making it. He said he hoped I was doing well, that he and Lydia had been talking, and that there was something they'd like to discuss with me when I had a moment. A family matter. Nothing urgent, just. He paused in a way that was meant to feel spontaneous but wasn't. Just something they'd been thinking through together, about the future. Planning. He said he'd love to grab dinner. His treat. I listened to the voicemail twice. Then I saved it. I understood what the call was. They had assessed my finances, concluded I was limited, and were now moving toward a conversation about my future that would, at some point, include a request. The cosign I would find out about later, the refinancing they were planning, the particular arithmetic of people who need money from someone they have underestimated. I called him back that evening. I said dinner sounded lovely. I said I'd be in Ballantyne the following Friday, and we could go wherever they preferred. He said, "Great, wonderful, can't wait." I said me neither. I had 4 days. I called my attorney, Sandra Okonkwo, on Wednesday morning. Sandra was 58, had done 3 prior transactions with me, and communicated in the specific shorthand of someone who had long ago stopped being surprised by the decisions of functional adults. I told her I was interested in a property. I told her why and in what sequence the events had occurred. There was a pause. "Carol," she said, "are you doing this because it's the right financial move or because it's the right personal one?" "Both," I said. She was quiet for a moment. "Those are the ones that work," she said. "Send me the listing." The property in question was a 6-story commercial office building on Fairview Road in the South Park area of Charlotte. I had been peripherally aware of it for 2 years. It had been through a complicated ownership transfer following a partnership dissolution and had been sitting in a kind of legal limbo that depressed its market price below what the fundamentals justified. The anchor tenant on floors 2 through 4 was a regional financial services company. The other tenants were a mix of professional services firms, 2 law practices, a financial planning group, and on the 5th floor, occupying roughly 400 square feet under a commercial lease that ran another 26 months, was the Charlotte branch office of Meridian Community Bank, where Marcus Reed worked as senior lending officer. I had not planned this specifically. I want to be precise about that. I had not gone looking for a building Marcus worked in. I had been watching that building for 2 years because of its fundamentals and its depressed price and the particular quality of its tenant mix, which suggested stability at a discount. The fact that Marcus worked there was information that had arrived in my peripheral vision some months earlier when Lydia had mentioned, in passing, that his office was in the South Park area near the movie theater. I had filed it without attaching significance to it. The significance arrived on its own schedule. Sandra filed the initial inquiry on Thursday. The seller's broker responded within the day. The property had been on the market for 11 months. The seller was a dissolved partnership whose 3 principals were each in different states and had different attorneys and different urgency levels. It was the kind of situation that rewards patience and cash. I had both Friday evening, I drove to Ballantyne and met Lydia and Marcus at a steak restaurant they liked, a place with low lighting and a wine list. Marcus always studied with great deliberateness. They were already seated when I arrived. Lydia stood and hugged me. Marcus shook my hand warmly, the handshake of someone who has prepared the handshake. We talked about the weather, about Lydia's work in HR, about the dogwood trees blooming early all over the city. The bread came. Marcus refilled his wine glass. It was Lydia who brought it up, which told me Marcus had chosen to position it that way. "Mom," she said, "we've been doing some thinking. About the future. She glanced at Marcus, about how we're all situated." She had her father's eyes and none of his directness, and I felt that as a particular kind of sadness. Marcus and I have been talking about refinancing the house. Interest rates have moved in a way that could save us a significant amount monthly. But we've run into a small issue with the debt-to-income calculation. Our bank, not his bank, she'd said that deliberately, our bank is asking for a cosigner. She looked at me. I waited a beat. "What would the co-signature cover?" I asked. Marcus leaned forward with the posture of a man entering his competency zone. "It's a formality," he said. "More than anything, it's about the paperwork. The debt-to-income ratio is very close to qualifying, and a secondary signature from a homeowner just smooths the process. Given your house in Myers Park, you'd easily qualify." "Given your house," I said. He nodded. "It's a straightforward transaction. The liability is entirely nominal. We'd never need to actually draw on it. I cut a piece of my steak. I chewed it. I set my fork down. "How much is the refinance?" I asked. Marcus mentioned a number. It was not a small number. It was the kind of number that is not nominal under any reasonable definition of the word. I told them I would think about it. Marcus said, "Of course, no rush," and smiled, and refilled Lydia's glass before his own. On the way to the parking lot, Lydia hugged me again and said she loved me, and I believed her, which made it more complicated, not less. I drove home in the dark and thought about the distinction between a person who does a harmful thing and a person who is a harmful person. Marcus was the first kind. Lydia, I was less certain about. I told Sandra the next morning to move forward on the Fairview Road building. The due diligence period ran 6 weeks. The building's financials were exactly what I had assessed from the outside. Solid bones, deferred maintenance on the HVAC system on floors 1 and 2, a vacancy on the 6th floor that had been empty 14 months and was dragging the income statement below what the building should produce. I negotiated accordingly. I came in with a cash offer at a price that acknowledged those realities and made clear that the price was not a starting position, but a conclusion. The sellers, 3 tired men in 3 different states, accepted within 48 hours. I told no one in Lydia's circle, not a mutual friend, not my sister who lived in Raleigh and talked more than she meant to. I had spent 22 years in a field where information is leverage, and the discipline of knowing which information belongs to you is the foundation of everything else. Closing occurred on a Wednesdays in May, 7 weeks after Sandra first filed the inquiry. I signed the documents in Sandra's conference room at 2 in the afternoon. She slid the final page across the table, and I signed my name on the line above purchaser, and below that line, in the space marked entity, the name Whitfield Capital Properties, LLC, a limited liability company I had established 8 years earlier to hold my investment assets. Sandra looked at the signed page. "You're now the landlord of 23 commercial tenants," she said. 24, I said. "The 6th floor just leased. I signed the letter of intent this morning." She smiled for the first time in the meeting. "Good," she said. I called Franklin on the way home to confirm the wire had cleared. He confirmed it had. Then he said, without editorializing, that he hoped I knew what I was doing. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said. He said that was what he thought, and we hung up. I had not yet responded to Marcus and Lydia about the co-signature request. I had let 3 weeks pass since the dinner, which I understood they were experiencing as deliberation. What it actually was timing. I sent Lydia a text the evening after closing. I told her I had been thinking about their request and would love to sit down and talk it through properly. Funner, would they be free Sunday? She replied within 4 minutes. Yes, absolutely, come for lunch. I arrived at noon. Lydia had made the chicken dish she knew I liked. Marcus had set the table. The dog was happy to see me in the unconditional way that dogs are happy, which I found, as always, clarifying. We ate. We talked. Marcus had the manner of a man who has been waiting for a conversation and is trying not to appear to be waiting. After the plates were cleared, Lydia put her hands on the table and said, gently, that they really appreciated me taking the time to think it through, and that they'd be so relieved if I could help them out. I said I had been doing some thinking of my own, and that there were a few things I wanted to be transparent about before we discussed the co-signature. Both of them went still in slightly different ways. Marcus went still like someone watching a card being turned over. Lydia went still like someone who senses the temperature has changed but isn't certain why. I said that I wanted them to know that I hadn't retired, that I was still working, had been for all 4 years of their marriage, on a reduced schedule that I had chosen for quality of life reasons, but that was still fully active employment. Marcus said, "Oh, I think we knew that." He did not know that. But I moved forward. I said I also wanted to share something about my financial situation, because I felt the conversation we were about to have required that foundation. And then I told them, plainly and without drama, what my position actually looked like. Not every number, not the document Franklin had prepared, just enough. The equities stakes, the investment accounts, the fact that the paid-off house in Myers Park was not the ceiling of my assets, but roughly the floor. The room was quiet for a moment. Marcus's expression moved through several phases with the speed of a man who is very quickly recalculating. Lydia looked at her hands. "I didn't know," she said. "I know," I said. "I didn't tell you. That was my choice. And I've been thinking about whether it was the right one." "Why didn't you?" she asked. And there was something genuine in the question, something underneath the management, that I was glad to hear. "Because your grandmother taught me that money disclosed without purpose is money that starts making decisions you didn't intend," I said. I wasn't hiding anything. I was just being careful. I'm still being careful. Marcus cleared his throat. "Well," he said, "this actually changes things considerably. In terms of the co-signature, I mean. This is actually," he shifted in his chair, "this is actually a much simpler conversation than we thought." I looked at him. "I have to be honest with you, Marcus," I said. "I'm not going to co-sign the refinance." His expression recalibrated again. "Not because I can't," I said. "Because I looked at the terms, and the structure of the loan you're describing is not in your best interest. The rate improvement is smaller than the closing costs, and the new term resets a mortgage you're 6 years into, which means you'd be paying primary interest again on a balance you've already made meaningful principal reductions on. I've run the numbers. You'd be underwater on the math within 2 years of signing." He blinked. He had not expected this particular sentence from this particular woman. "I also want to tell you something else," I said, and I said it the way I would have said it in any professional meeting. Calmly, with the specificity of someone who has organized her thoughts in advance. I recently closed on a commercial property acquisition. a building on Fairview Road in South Park. I've been aware of it for some time, and the seller's circumstances created an opportunity. I decided to move on. Lydia said that was great. That was wonderful. Good for me. She said it with the warmth of someone who did not yet understand why I was telling her this at this particular moment. Marcus understood why. I could see it in the way he had gone very still again, but differently from before. This was not the stillness of calculation. This was the stillness of a man stacking information and arriving at an uncomfortable total. The Fairview Road building, I said. 6 floors, 24 tenants, as of this week. I believe you're familiar with the 5th floor. The silence that followed was not long, but it was complete. Marcus put his hands flat on the table. His voice, when he found it, was careful. "Carol," he said, "I want to make sure I understand what you're my tenant," I said pleasantly. "Technically, Meridian Community Bank is my tenant, and you work for Meridian Community Bank. But yes, that's the building. I want to be accurate about what happened next because I have told this story to 2 people, Sandra and my sister Renee. And both of them ask me the same question. Did I enjoy it? And I have thought about that question honestly. The answer is that I did not feel triumph. What I felt was something more like the specific satisfaction of a long equation finally resolving on both sides of the equal sign. The same feeling I got on a good acquisition, the sense that the thing that was supposed to happen had happened. Marcus said that he hoped I understood this wasn't something personal. I said that I understood it exactly as what it was. Lydia looked between us. She was arriving at something. I could see it moving across her face the way weather moves across an open field, not all at once but unmistakably. "Mom," she said. "Did you?" She stopped. "Was this?" She stopped again. I waited. "Did you buy this building because of us?" she asked. I thought about the honest answer, which was layered in a way that a yes or no would not accommodate. I bought the building because the fundamentals justified it, and the timing was right, I said. I've had my eye on it for 2 years. The personal circumstances accelerated my timeline. But the acquisition stands on its own merits, and I would have made it eventually regardless. She was quiet. Marcus was quiet. The dog walked through the room and went to lie down by the back door and looked at all 3 of us with the philosophical detachment of a creature that has seen a great deal of human behavior and stopped expecting it to resolve quickly. "I would like to say," I said, because I think it needs to be said directly, that I read a text message on your phone in March, Lydia. I picked up the wrong phone. I saw the first line of a conversation with Marcus before I understood what I was looking at. I'm telling you this because I think we've both been operating with information about the other one that the other one doesn't know we have, and I'd rather put that on the table than leave it where it is. Lydia's face went through something. I won't try to name all of it. "What did it say?" she asked, though I thought she might already know. "That I didn't have anything real," I said. "That I wasn't going to solve anything for you financially." That was the substance of it. She closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them. "Marcus," she said, and the way she said his name was the first thing I had heard from her all afternoon that was fully her own. He started to say something. She held up one hand, not dramatically, just a single, decisive gesture. The gesture of a woman who had just recalculated something and arrived at a number she didn't like. "I think," she said, "I need a few minutes." She got up and walked through the kitchen and out the back door into the yard. The dog got up and followed her. Marcus and I sat at the table. He turned his coffee cup in a small circle. I looked at the grain of the wood in the table and thought about the fact that Lydia and I had stained that table together the first summer after they moved in a Saturday in July when Robert had been gone 2 years, and I was still learning to fill weekends differently. After a while, Marcus said, I should have talked to her about it differently. I said I appreciated him saying so. He said he hadn't meant it the way it sounded. I said that intentions are worth less than outcomes, but that I understood they weren't the same thing. He nodded. He seemed, for the first time in my experience of him, to not know what came next. I told him that the tenant lease on the 5th floor was a legal document between Meridian Community Bank and Whitfield Capital Properties, LLC, and that his employment situation was not something I had any interest in affecting or threatening. I said I had never done business that way in 22 years, and I didn't intend to start now. I told him that the building was an investment, and that the best investments are ones where everyone in the building is doing well. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, quietly, I didn't think you had any real money. I know, I said. He nodded again. He looked like a man who had been very certain of a map and had just discovered the map was wrong. Outside, through the kitchen window, I could see Lydia sitting on the back step, with the dog pressed against her side and her face turned up toward the trees. She was not crying. She was thinking. She looked, from this angle, very much like Robert in the last year of his life, when he had learned to be still with the difficult things instead of moving away from them. I had loved that quality in him. I loved it in her, too. She came back inside after 10 minutes. She poured herself a glass of water and sat down. She looked at me directly. I want to understand all of it, she said. Not today, maybe, but I want to understand. I told her we had time. She asked if I was angry. I said anger was the wrong word. I said I had felt something closer to grief, and something else beneath it that I was still working to name. She said she was sorry. She said it without qualification, without distribution, without the passive architecture of mistakes were made and things were said. She said it directly, in her own voice, with her own face, and I believed her. We stayed at the table for another hour. Marcus mostly listened. Lydia talked. I talked. We didn't resolve everything. There are things in that conversation that will take a long time to work through. The kind of working through that doesn't happen at kitchen tables, but happens in the accumulation of ordinary time. Sunday phone calls, holiday dinners, the slow rebuilding of trust between people who have seen each other clearly for the first time and are deciding what to do with that clarity. I drove home in the early evening through the spring-lit streets of Charlotte, through the neighborhoods I had worked in and around for over 2 decades, and I felt what I can only describe as the relief of a foundation checked and found to be sound, not unchanged, not uncracked, but sound. Franklin called the following morning to confirm that the 6th floor tenant had executed the full lease. I told him the building was fully leased for the first time in 14 months. He said that was very good news and asked if I was planning to look for anything else in the near term. I told him to give me the summer. The hydrangeas along my back fence had finally recovered from 2 hard winters. I had been nursing them since Robert died, adjusting the soil pH in the fall, covering them in March, hoping, in June, they opened into the particular shade of blue that I had never managed to predict exactly, which I had come to understand as one of their better qualities. I cut a full bunch for the kitchen table and stood in the yard for a while with dirt on my gloves, listening to the neighborhood go about its afternoon. Lydia called on a Sunday in July, late morning, the time slot she had used her whole life for the calls that mattered. We talked for an hour and a half, not about Marcus, not about the building, not about any of the arithmetic that had nearly swallowed the previous year. We talked about Robert, about what he had been like in the years before she was old enough to remember him clearly, about a road trip the three of us had taken to the Outer Banks when she was 7, and he had insisted on stopping at every historical marker on Route 64 until Lydia had fallen asleep on the back seat, and he and I had driven the last hour in the pleasant quiet of two people who are happy without needing to announce it. She asked me things she had never asked before. I answered them. I am still working. 3 days a week now, down from the reduced schedule I had held through all of this, a further step toward something I have not yet named, because I am not quite ready to name it. My firm gave me a send-off I found unexpectedly moving when I transitioned to consulting status in October. 11 people in a conference room with decent champagne and a framed aerial photograph of a building in Uptown that I had brought into the portfolio 14 years ago when everyone said the neighborhood wasn't ready. The Fairview Road building is performing above its acquisition projections. The 6th-floor tenant signed a 5-year extension in September. The HVAC issue on floors 1 and 2 was resolved for considerably less than the initial estimate because I had asked Franklin to get 3 bids and had reviewed them myself, which I will do until I am physically incapable of reviewing a bid. Marcus and I are not warm with each other. I don't think we will be, not in the way that erases what was built and what was said. But at Thanksgiving, he passed me the serving dish without being asked. And when I said something about the loan structure at dinner, a topic that came up genuinely and not strategically, he listened. He asked a question. He wrote something down. I don't know what to call that exactly. Maybe the beginning of a different kind of conversation. Lydia came alone for a weekend in November. We cooked. We walked. We drove out to see Robert's grave on the Sunday morning and stood in the cold for a while and didn't say much, because there are things that are fully said in silence between the right people. On the drive back, she asked me why I had never told her. I thought about the honest answer. About my mother's kitchen in Roanoke, where money in abundance was kept as quiet as money in scarcity, because both required the same discipline. About 22 years of learning that the people who understand the value of something are rarely the ones who advertise it. About the specific comfort of knowing exactly what you are worth without needing anyone else to know it too. Because I didn't need you to, I said. And because I thought I had more time to figure out the right way. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I think I've been letting him decide things I should have decided for myself. I know, I said. She looked out the window at the county roads going by, the winter fields, the bare tree lines. I know you know, she said. We drove the rest of the way without the radio. When I pulled into her neighborhood, she put her hand briefly on my arm before she got out of the car. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. I drove home through the early dark, through streets that were beginning to put up their holiday lights, and I thought that the thing about being precise is that it costs something real. The waiting costs something. The silence costs something. The decision to let things arrive at their proper moment instead of forcing them costs something that you don't always get back. But some returns are not financial. I was exactly where I was supposed to be. I had been, I think, for longer than I knew.